Okay. So I've let everybody know. Lovely. We'll just let Denise in and then I think we'll make a start. Hi Denise, welcome.
Hello.
Hi there. Yeah, we're just about to make a start, so you're just in time. What I posted in the chat is if you'd like to enable your chat bar. Hi Nicola, welcome to you as well. Hi there. Yes, ladies, if you could please turn cameras off and mute. It just means through the duration of the webinar and the recording, the focus will be on our presenters and then speaking to you. So I'd like to say a warm welcome to everybody from schools. I'm sure you've hit the ground running in school and you're hoping to get to that half term. You're probably counting down the sleeps, aren't you, to half term? So a very warm welcome. I have two colleagues who will be leading today's webinar. My name's Sally Milstead. I'm from Medway Safeguarding Children's Partnership and I'm really hosting today's session. This is the second webinar in a series really around the National Referral Mechanism. We hosted one back in the summer for wider professionals and felt that schools at the time that we presented we knew was a bad time for you. It was right at the end of term, so we thought we would do a specific one for education because we think that still a lot of people are unaware of the national referral mechanism, and we feel it's important that we share this understanding of how important it is if you think a child or family is facing some form of exploitation or modern slavery or trafficking. So I would like to introduce you to colleagues. We have Karen Reid. Karen is the missing and exploitation lead here in Medway. She is on the missing children team and part of our first response service at Medway Council. She will be presenting to you shortly. And can I also introduce to you Alice Brown? Alice is team manager here in the south for Barnardo's, and she is representing from the Independent Child Trafficking Guardian, and she will be telling you more about how Barnardo's can support us as professionals, but also the support they offer to children who are referred in. So I would now like to hand over to Karen, who will take you through our presentation.
Good afternoon all. Oh, there's going to be lots of noises going on. Hopefully it doesn't disturb you all too much and doesn't interfere with the recording. Good afternoon, everybody. So we're here today to talk about the National Referral Mechanism, and often you hear it referred to as NRMs. Have you done the NRM? Is there an NRM that's been completed? So today, hopefully in this session, we want to be able to talk you through what is this NRM and what is it in relation to, and when would you use the NRM? So National Referral Mechanism is the full title, but we've got a really good video in the kind of 5 years or 6 years that I've been looking at national referral mechanisms. This is kind of the best, quick, sharp video that tells you everything you need to know. And actually, I often go back to it and remind myself of some of the points on it as well. So it's a good place to start if we have a little look at that video and just give us a little bit of a kind of a minute to think about what it really all means. So hopefully the sound should work, fingers crossed. Let me know if you have any problems with the sound quality. Thank you, Sally.
The National Referral Mechanism. Have you identified someone who could be a victim of modern slavery? Think NRM.
Can everybody hear that? Okay, some thumbs up would be great.
What is NRM? The National Referral Mechanism, NRM, is the UK's mechanism to identify, assess and support potential victims of modern slavery. This is independent of any criminal investigation. The NRM can only be completed by a registered first responder. This includes the police and local authorities. Question: how old are they? If they're less than 18 years old, they will be classed as a child, and that affects how they will be dealt with. If they are a child, an NRM must be completed for all children that are suspected to be a victim of trafficking, whether they make a disclosure or not. This includes when they are believed to be exploited through criminality such as county lines. They'll be supported by the local authority. If the potential victim was trafficked as a child and is now an adult, they should be treated as an adult and consent is needed. Adults must give their consent in relation to the NRM. This is why it's important we understand what it involves so the individual can make informed decisions. There are two distinct paths to the NRM process. The first is consenting to the passing of personal information and details. The second is consenting to outreach support, including accommodation. Just because they do not want the support of the NRM, this does not mean they refuse consent. If an adult victim declines the consent to pass their details to the NRM, we still need to complete a duty to notify. This is to help the government and local police forces build a better picture of modern slavery. Any DTN and NRMs completed will go to the local police force. The NRM is managed by the Single Competent Authority, SCA, at the Home Office. There are two stages to the NRM. Stage 1. This refers to the initial reasonable grounds decision. This is where the SCA review the initial referral to see if there is information available that suggests the individual might be a victim. This has two outcomes: positive RG or negative RG. Remember, the SCA make the RG decision on do we suspect but cannot prove. Negative RGs can be appealed if you truly believe the individual is a victim. Positive RGs means the victim has now been accepted into the NRM and is entitled to a range of support. This includes a recovery and reflection period of a minimum of 45 days. Top tip: put as much information on the referral as possible, and collaborating with other agencies, for example a multi-agency strategy meeting, is key. Not including information could mean genuine victims aren't accessing the specialist support they're entitled to. Remember, when completing the NRM, think about the act, means and purpose. Think full details of the victim exploitation or trafficking, including how they came to notice. Exact addresses, locations of all exploitation trafficking in UK so that the NRM is sent to the correct police force as quickly as possible. Comprehensive victim information and contact details. Is the victim vulnerable? If so, why? Do they have injuries? Their address, phone numbers, emails, family and friends in the UK. Do other victims need safeguarding? How many and where are they? These elements have come from the United Nations Palermo Protocol and is what the SCA will use to make their decisions at Stage 2. Stage 2 is where the SCA review all the information available relating to the victim and their case. If you are working on an investigation with victims in the NRM, it's your responsibility to update the SCA on the investigation progress and any evidence which may help the victim receive a positive decision. Remember, when providing information to the SCA, they should be specially told if the information is sensitive and should not be shared. As an investigator, where an NRM has been submitted by another first responder and you don't believe they are a victim, you should also keep the SCA updated with your investigation. The SCA will then assess the information and evidence to reach a final, conclusive grounds decision. The outcome of this decision can be a positive CG or a negative CG. This is a balance of probabilities threshold. Top tip: consistent and reliable contact with victims can increase their engagement in an investigation. Even if there is no update on the investigation, ring the victim or their caseworker and say there is no update. This helps the potential victim trust the police and feel supported. During Stage 2, the victim will be receiving support from a subcontract provider. These are organisations around the UK who are contracted to provide care and support to help victims recover from their exploitation. The victim will receive a caseworker who will work with them to assess their short and long-term needs. This can include access to safe and secure accommodation, medical support, legal and immigration advice, mental health and well-being support. Top tip: make sure to make contact with their caseworker. Caseworkers build a trusting relationship with the victim and can hold a wealth of information the victim might not feel comfortable disclosing to the police straight away. For any NRM or DTN recorded in England and Wales, a corresponding modern slavery crime must be recorded and investigated. NRM and DTN forms are online and can be found at www.modernslavery.gov.uk/start.
Thank you. So if I was watching that thinking, if NRMs are new to you, it would feel like that is a minefield of information. But that is a really good video to go back, as I said at the beginning, to refresh yourself if you come up to the same situation when you're in a strategy discussion or you're discussing with your colleagues. Is this child possibly a victim of human trafficking, or is this family victims of human trafficking? So here we've got a little bit of a breakdown. This figure shows us a breakdown in 2020, bearing in mind that this is lockdown period and COVID-19, of what exploitation was occurring through trafficking, through the referrals that were coming through for the NRM. And as you can see right at the top here, we've got criminal exploitation being the highest referrals that were received, and actually highest for children in this period. And just kind of overlooking missing myself in Medway, that reflects that, because we know for missing in Medway, we had more children missing over the period of lockdown than we had prior to lockdown. And actually, we've never really got our numbers back to pre-COVID numbers. So we know that there is an issue around criminal exploitation nationally. And this shows us in the NRM referrals that are being received for criminal exploitation. Next slide, please, Sally. Oh, one too many. This gives us a breakdown based on nationality in the same year, so in 2020. So we can see here, over that period of lockdown, we can see children were higher, referrals were coming in, and it was across the nationality of citizens who's identified as UK citizens, which some people might find quite surprising. And when you look at trafficking, I think the first thing to think, if it's something that's new to you, is that we're not looking at necessarily international trafficking. We are talking the movement of people, which we'll hear more, the forced movement of people as we go along. Next slide, please, Sally. So this gives us a bit of a breakdown of when we're looking at human trafficking, what is it we're actually referring to within this, and how does this link with the NRM? So human trafficking, according to Anti-Slavery International, I think this is the language here that I've bolded, is really for us to be able to get our minds around trafficking and get our head. What does this really mean? So human trafficking is the process of trapping people, and this is using violence and coercion and exploitation, and this is often for financial and personal gain. So it's really important to understand that process of what happens when a person is being trafficked. What does that mean? According to Metropolitan Police, we've taken two kind of breakdowns of what they identify as. Firstly, is human trafficking as being when people are brought and moved around, and this could be country, like I said, or local, and forced to do something against their will that they do not want to do. Okay. And also the reminder here that if this can happen to men, women, children of all ages, all backgrounds, and anyone can be a victim of this particular crime. Next slide, please, Sally. It's really important when we understand and begin to explore if a child is being trafficked, that we have the empathy and understanding that children cannot consent to this form of exploitation. So this means that we are understanding that the fact that a person is a child means that they cannot consent to what's going on, and they're actually being abused in this process of being exploited. It's really important that we understand what that means. This means that young people do not know, even if it looks willing, that they are involved. Exploitation in its very nature is very complex. And what we tend to say in our team quite a lot is, when did the choice begin and when did it end? So that's really important, that even if the situation looks willing, that a child is willing to go into the car knowing what was going to happen to them, actually we understand that that does not mean that they are not in themselves a victim. And that also doesn't mean that they don't end up putting other children at risk within that. The very fact that they're under 18 means that in the eyes of the law that they're children, and we respond to them in that way. Next slide, please, Sally. So when we get our heads around the NRM itself, and the kind of who can do an NRM, we'll look at who can do it as we go along. But the purpose of itself of the NRM, it isn't separate to any safeguarding responses that we all know and we all trained in doing. And we would naturally still respond in the same way we do when we believe that there's a concern of trafficking. We will still make the referral into children's services and inform the police. But in addition, what we're saying about the NRM is this is something that supports children along that process. So as schools, you are not naturally NRM first responders. But nevertheless, we felt like it was really important to bring this information to you and have a time really to explore what the NRM means for the children that you'll be working with. So certain organisations such as the police and local authorities are naturally, they have a duty to respond and to make sure that they're putting that in to respond to this based on suspicion. So again, this isn't that we have evidence or that there's been an arrest. This is based on pure suspicion that we have a feeling that something's not right. Something, there's been indicators that have told us that we believe that this child is a victim of human trafficking. The first responder is the language you'll hear for the person that makes that referral into the NRM. And what will happen is the first responder will make that referral and they'll update parents as to let them know what's going on. They do not need to consent. So that video that we watched talks a lot about consent, and we're focusing a bit on children, adults, so over 18. But first responders, you do not need to get consent from the child. The fact that they're a child, we can make that referral. If there are signs and indicators that there is human trafficking going on, the Home Office will make a decision if the person is a victim of trafficking. So it isn't for us to say we think this and we can say it, but it doesn't hold any weight until it's gone through that process with the Home Office. Some charities, by their very nature, such as the NSPCC and Modern Day Slavery, are natural first responders. Next
I'm in a
slide,
live
please,
webinar.
Sally.
Get 'em out.
Hello? Oh, one back, Sally. Perfect. So this gives us a breakdown of some of the first responders. So you yourselves will come across some of these cases and think, well, actually, I'm not a first responder. Who do I connect with? Your initial response would be, if you work in the schools, you would do your normal processes of safeguarding, and then you would go to Children's Services and actually recommend, I believe this child is a victim of human trafficking. And within your referral, you can actually explore what those indicators are, why you feel like that is the case. Next slide, please, Sally. So our commitment to children in Medway, and we've been really dedicated to try and get as much information out there about NRMs as possible, is I would say don't assume the people, if you've got children who are open to Children's Services, don't assume that those case holders have a great knowledge of NRMs. It isn't where we want it to be, which is why we think it's really important that as many people as possible really pick up and question if NRMs are in place for children that they're aware of, where they are concerns of exploitation. So it's really important that our commitment is, as part of multi-agency discussions that you're involved in, is to ask and question some of these things. So our commitment in Medway, in the first instance, is to hold a multi-agency discussion, which schools should be involved with. And as part of that discussion, a first responder will be identified. The first responder will be the one that makes the referral. And as part of that, it doesn't necessarily mean before or after, but one of the most important things in that process is that the Independent Child Trafficking Service, which we're going to hear from Alice after this bit, they're involved in supporting the child through that process, so they can come to meetings and explain stuff. Sorry, hold on a second. That time when everyone runs in my house, and that we're going to work with children through understanding through their trauma, and we're going to try and challenge language that we hear young people often being spoken about, that they're putting themselves at risk. It's really important when we're looking at trafficking and we're looking at exploitation that we challenge and learn from each other around the language that we use. And here below we've got finally the link to the NRM. I will hand you over now to Alice.
Thank you. So welcome everyone, thank you for coming today. So as Sally said at the start, I'm the team manager for the South region for the Independent Child Trafficking Guardianship Service. So we are written into legislation. We're part of the Modern Slavery Act, which means that professionals do have a duty to refer into us if they believe a child is being exploited. or trafficked, or if they have an NRM in place already. So originally the ICTIG service was just being piloted in 3 adopter sites, but in May 2021, so last year, we expanded to the areas that you can see on the slide. We're hoping in the near future that we will expand again to cover more areas, but it's really good that we cover this breadth of the UK at the moment because, for example, when children do go missing, we can often find them being identified in one of our other areas, which means we can link up and share information, and they can still have that all-rounded support depending on what area they're found in. We have 2 strands of support that we offer through our service. So the first strand is the ICTIG model, and that is delivered for children that do not have anyone with parental responsibility in the UK. So typically it's for the unaccompanied asylum-seeking children that have been exploited. The work with them is direct work, so we're able to see them on a weekly basis to start with, where we build up our relationship with them, and then depending on their risk, we alter how often we see them. So if they're high risk, we will continue to see them weekly, but if they are more settled or there's not as much concern over the young person and their safety, this might reduce to fortnightly or monthly, depending on the individual needs of the child. We're really lucky that we do have capacity and flexibility to adapt how often we see the children. So for example, if a child was quite settled and we were only seeing them on a monthly basis, but then perhaps new concerns arose or the child was facing significant difficulties at one point, we could then increase our visits to see them, which is really, really positive. And we do understand that not all professionals have that capacity to do that. And as a result of that, often we are the ones that children and young people do end up disclosing things to. So we tend to be in quite a good position to provide additional evidence for the NRM. Our support is really diverse. It really depends on the child's needs. It depends on the type of trafficking they might have encountered. It depends on their risk level, and it might depend on their age as well. So we work with children and young people all ages up to the age of 18. The youngest I've ever worked with in this service was 3 years old, and the oldest was turning 18. So obviously with the 3-year-old, it was a lot of play and arts and crafts, creativity, to try and understand what that child was feeling and to understand what they've been through. And then with the teenagers, I still think trying to incorporate play and creativity is really important, especially where a lot of them have maybe missed out on their childhood through being exploited. So I still try and incorporate that where I can, as it takes the pressure off them having to communicate as well. We don't ask the children questions about their experiences, but we do provide that safe space should they want to talk to us about what they've been through or any concerns that they have. We use interpreters and we have lots of resources in different languages because the majority of our children that receive this form of support do not speak English as a first language. We know as professionals, I'm sure you can all agree, how difficult it can be to understand the different systems in the UK, so criminal justice, immigration, social care, and obviously these are children that often don't have English as a first language and have not been brought up in the UK, so we really understand how difficult it is for them to navigate these systems. So we're there to explain it to them in a child-friendly way, and then we also attend appointments with them, meetings with them, or on behalf of them where we advocate for their best interests. We then have a second line of support, which is called our RPC model, which stands for Regional Practice Coordinator. And this is for children that do have someone with parental responsibility in the UK, and typically they are British citizens or they reside in the UK with their family normally. The main difference is that these children and young people at this moment in time do not get the direct support themselves. We hope that in the future that will be possible, but for the time being, they they don't receive the direct support, but they'll still have a worker allocated to their case, and they're just there in that guardianship and advocacy role. So they'll still attend professional meetings, and they'll provide like an expertise around child trafficking and safety. They're there for like case consultations. They're there to help the professionals navigate the different systems, and we're still first responders, so we can still help with submitting that NRM and submitting additional evidence. But yeah, for the time being, that's the main difference between the two different strands of support. And the support for both goes up to the age of 18. We are piloting post-18 in some areas, but unfortunately in the South region, we don't have post-18 workers at the moment. But hopefully in the future we will, because we do understand that at the age of 18, a lot of support drops off and children are then at a higher risk of going missing or being re-trafficked. So hopefully in the future that will be expanded. I just wanted to talk about a real brief case study to look at how the NRM can be a positive benefit for children and young people. So one young person that we've supported within our service was a 14-year-old boy, and he was frequently going missing. He had poor attendance at school. He was in the South region, he was in Hampshire, and then he was identified after a missing episode in London, where he was found with drugs on him. Now, because he had an NRM in place, it meant that he was identified as a victim rather than an offender, which led to his charges being dropped. So that's just a very short case study of many that can like highlight the importance of the NRM and how it can ensure that children are seen as victims and that they are then accessing that appropriate support that they're entitled to. So we have a 24-hour helpline. It's open 365 days of the year. You can call this number at any time, especially as yourselves, as professionals that work in education provisions, are not first responders. It can be useful to ring us up and talk things through with us, and then we can either make that referral to the SEA, or alternatively, we might be able to advise you to make a referral to social services, or we can provide other advice and guidance around the child. And sometimes it's just really helpful to ring up and talk through a case that you might be dealing with, and you just might not really understand what next steps to do, or you might not understand the indicators of child trafficking. So there's always someone there to provide that advice and guidance. And that number is for all professionals. We get a lot of foster carers and placement staff that really utilise it, because if they have concerns whilst the child is living with them, they can ring us up and we can help in the interim. Okay, thank you. Next slide. Okay, so the NRM process for adults is different. So for children, you do not need their consent to refer them in. However, when they turn 18, they must consent to remain in the NRM, or if they haven't been referred, consent to being referred into the NRM. This can be quite difficult because sometimes we do have children and young people that ask to withdraw their consent when they're turning 18. So a piece of work that we will do with them when it's leading up to their 18th birthday is talk to them again about the NRM and the importance of staying in the system. Even if an adult did not want to give consent, as professionals we still have a duty to notify. So that comes in the Modern Slavery Act. We have that duty to notify the Home Office about all potential victims of trafficking and slavery within the UK. Then it just says here as well about non-first responders. So for anyone under the age of 18, you just need to refer them to Children's Services or the police, or you can contact our helpline. And then for those over the age of 18, you could contact the Salvation Army, who could complete a referral, or I would probably suggest the Modern Slavery Helpline as well. Okay, next slide, please. So the NRM has different outcomes. It's a two-stage process. So when an NRM is completed, within 5 days, you should be given a reasonable grounds decision. And a reasonable grounds decision means I suspect but cannot prove that they are a victim of trafficking. So at this stage, it just means that the SEA have gathered enough evidence to suspect that a child or an adult may be a victim. And that's really important to bear in mind as professionals, because as long as there's enough information in that initial referral, they should get their reasonable decision as positive. After receiving that, if they receive a negative one, then professionals can request for a reconsideration, where they would maybe go back with further information, or the SCA might request specific information in order to reconsider their decision, which could then lead to a positive outcome. Or if it's negative, it might mean that a new NRM has to be submitted altogether when new information comes to light. But if they have a positive decision, there's then what they call the minimum 45-day reflective period. And in that time, it's a chance for professionals to work together, to come together, to share information, and then someone takes the lead on pulling all of that information together and submitting it to the SEA. So although working in schools and colleges, you might not be a first responder, you still have a really significant role to play, especially where children and young people spend so much time at school and college. It's quite common that teachers, for example, see the trafficking indicators, or they might overhear something, or children and young people might disclose something to them that they might not necessarily tell their social worker. So that's why professional meetings are so important, so that all the information can be drawn together and submitted to the SCA, which could then lead to them being identified as a victim if they get their conclusive grounds decision. So in order to make a conclusive grounds decision, the SCA says that it's more likely than not that the child or the adult is a victim of trafficking. So if it's quite probable that they are, then they should get their conclusive grounds decision, If, for example, they don't get it, then again, we can request a reconsideration, we can submit more evidence, or it might mean that a whole new NRM has to be submitted once new information comes to light. And it just says here as well, although parents can't make an NRM referral, they can send in new information after the referral. So this can be done in partnership. So again, really key that we have that multi-agency working and just that clear line of communication. So the positives of an NRM decision, as I mentioned before, it can help with criminal justice. It can help to ensure that the child is seen as a victim and not an offender. It can help them with their legal support. It can help ensure that they access the right emotional and practical support. It means that they can get support from our service, so an extra support worker that can advocate in their best interests. It can help with advocating for support from social services, and help ensure that that young person can recover from their experiences. A lot of the time with asylum claims, they may not make an asylum decision until they get the NRM decision, so it can really have an impact for immigration matters. And then, yeah, it impacts on safeguarding decisions as well. Yeah, next slide, please. And just as I was mentioned before, if you're not happy with the decision that the NRM results in, then it can be requested that it's reconsidered. And yeah, they would have right to legal representation to challenge that decision for a public law solicitor. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Alice. So I'd just like to take you through a few more slides, and then we will have time for any questions that you'd like to put to perhaps Alice or Karen. So we just want to signpost you really to further resources, and we will be sending out later today or first thing tomorrow a copy of today's presentation slides and some accompanying resources as well. There is a great deal out there, so I think sometimes it's hard to know where to turn or which resource to use, but we acknowledge here some key organisations, the Children's Society and Barnardo's, and the Home Office did link with us in terms of providing us with some key data. We at the MSCP do have some specific training around child exploitation. Some of that is virtual training, some of it's face-to-face, but we also have e-learning. So we've got a number of courses there on human trafficking and slavery that can be accessed as well. And we've signposted you to one that's offered by Border Force. So there is quite a lot of training widely available out there. We will also send out the Ken and MSCP exploitation tool. This is a useful conversational tool if a child or a parent is beginning to reveal to you and you begin to feel like there are signs here of exploitation or trafficking or human slavery. We also have our own NRM fact sheet, and that is relevant for both first responders and non-first responders. It tells you about the process and how to take action if you become aware. We will also be sending out to you a really useful appropriate language guide that comes from the Children's Society. Alice mentioned the Barnardo's helpline, which is there as well. The Salvation Army, as she mentioned, are the identified first responder for adults. The NSPCC is there 24 hours a day also for all children and can be a contact for you to get further advice. And then specifically, there is a modern slavery helpline. That's a government helpline. Locally, we've already heard about the offer from Medway Children's Services that in the first case, if you're in an education setting, please do come to them. And of course, if it's an urgent case, you can immediately call 999 and contact the police as well. If you are a parent, then PACE is a really, really supportive organisation. We've heard very good things about their resources and support they can offer, and there are contact details there about PACE. So this is a bit of a time really that if you do have specific questions, if you'd like to either put your hand up in the chat or just simply unmute and come onto screen, and we'll see if you can help you with any questions. Just see if there's anything in the chat. So I don't think there's any specific questions come up. You can, of course, as well contact us following this session. We've got contact details in the slides that we're sending out to you. I'll just give you a moment. Looks like Harriet might be asking a question. Hi, Karen. We're just asking for questions. Nothing's come up in the chat at the moment, but I would just say that if after this webinar you do have further queries, please do come to us. There will be contact details for you. Just a little bit more.
Sorry, I've just spotted a question come up. Harriet's asking, what support does PACE offer parents? I'm happy to answer that. From what I know, so PACE for me is a really good website to be able to direct parents to understand what is exploitation in the first instance. It has a really good breakdown of what could be going on. I've seen videos, I've seen a phone number to call, and generally it just looks like a good spot to understand from a parent's point of view what could be going on around exploitation. I don't know if they offer anything more in terms of direct support as necessary of anybody to come out. I think it's more website based and phone based. Does that answer your question, Harriet, hopefully? No problem, thank you.
So yeah, just to let you know that in Medway we do have an exploitations champion network. So I'm a member of that network. So is Karen. We're a group of professionals who really are passionate about getting the word out there about exploitation, and in particular getting that message across that, particularly for young people, if they can fall into the hands of wrong people and make poor decisions, we want them to have a second chance. I was talking with someone the other day and she said to me, I feel like I did mix with the wrong people and I need to take responsibility for that. And when we talked about her situation, we recognised, and I said to her, do you know what, you were facing a really tough time at home at that time, and then you were being welcomed by some people who were taking you down the wrong path. You didn't have very many good choices. And she hadn't seen it that way. She was kind of taking ownership and responsibility and saying, yes, but I said yes and I went along with it. And I think it is about, for our young people, about saying that we can all make mistakes, and take that path. And we want there to be that second chance. And I think the NRM can be part of that, that new pathway and that support to recognise that that can happen for young people. So the Exploitation Champion Network, we try and meet bi-monthly. The meetings are virtual, and that really works for a lot of professionals, we find. So whatever your setting, we try and do the meetings kind of later in the day. That's right, isn't it, Karen? So we try and make them more accessible. Even if you joined a bit later, that would be fine. But if you would be interested in joining the next Exploitations Network, please just contact us on MSCP Training, and we can provide you with that link to come and join us. It's a really good network. It really invigorates us. We talk about the current picture in Medway, some of the support that's going on, some of the actions, and we think about the current climate and some of the risks that our young children are facing out there.
There's lots of an opportunity really to hear about the local trends, and then we get to kind of learn about what's happening nationally and what people are doing, and think, well, what does that mean for Medway children, families? So yeah, it is a very invigorating meeting. We are always looking for members, so please push yourself forward.
Come join us.
Join us.
So we would like to share a really short video. It's a really interesting kind of cartoon style that's really emphasizing about how we can fall into that trap of blaming young children, and how to perhaps avoid victim blaming language. So I'd like to play this. It's only a few minutes long, but it's a really interesting highlight to how language is so important with young people.
Hey, did you hear?
No, what's up?
James is dead.
What? Oh my God, what happened?
Apparently somebody killed him at a party.
What party? Was he there alone?
At that big party off campus on Friday.
Oh man, wow. That sucks.
Yeah.
Was he drinking at the party?
Huh? I don't know. I guess some. It was a party after all.
Yeah, 'cause alcohol makes it harder to fight off a murderer, and he may have made some bad choices about who to talk to.
Well, everyone was probably drinking some.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, what was he wearing though?
What?
Well, you know how he wears all those V-neck t-shirts?
Yeah, but
I'm just saying, if you don't want to get stabbed in the neck, consider wearing a turtleneck sweater or something.
I don't think that really...
Also, James was super friendly.
Yeah, poor James.
I mean, he was so outgoing.
Yeah, nice guy.
He talked to everyone.
Yeah.
So it's kind of no surprise that he eventually met a murderer.
What?
I'm just saying, if you don't want to get murdered, don't go around talking to strangers at parties and just expect it to be fine. Did he even blow the murder whistle that Student Life gave us?
No, I think it was in his coat. The murder happened so fast.
In his coat. Typical freshman move. I mean, 1 in 5 college students gets murdered. He should have been more careful. No one ever thinks it will happen to them.
I guess. His family must be devastated.
I know. They must be so ashamed that he let himself get murdered like that. It's got to be so embarrassing for them.
What? No, I meant...
So did they find out who did it? I mean, assuming it was a murder and not some assisted suicide thing. Hey, maybe James really wanted this to happen.
No, he definitely didn't. And it was definitely Robert. Some people walked in on the murder, but they didn't think it was any of their business.
Robert? Oh, he's such a nice guy. He's definitely not a murderer.
He is. He definitely did it.
Yeah, well, he just felt like ending James's life, and he did, but he's not like a murderer. Besides, James was such jailbait, you know?
Huh?
I mean, he just had that look that you can totally see wanting to commit a felony and murder him. It's perfectly normal. Poor Robert. Really, it's sad how many young people's lives are ruined just because they kill a few people in college.
Yes, we've shared this in our exploitation champions meeting, and it was an interesting discussion then, just about how we can normalise that young people walk into situations and use that kind of blaming language about that they should have seen things coming when they're young people, and we know even as adults that we can perhaps be drawn into situations unwittingly and unknowingly, and how we just want those children to have that second chance, really. Karen, is there anything you want to add about James has said?
No, it does make me think. The bit I was kind of getting interrupted with earlier was the bit around trauma. I didn't get to say as much as I wanted to say, which was, you know, people come with a story, don't they? We all come with a story. We all come with our own background, our own lives, and it influences who we are and the decisions we make. There's just something about children that it's so scrutinized now more than ever with social media and then being able to put things behind them. And that second chance is just so important. And they're carrying around all of their story, their history, and everything in one go. And often as adults, we want them to understand what's going on and see what's going on and tell us they understand what's going on for us to recognize them to be victims. It's just that kind of push to recognize that we may not ever see that the child recognizes themselves as being a victim, but that doesn't mean that they are not. Just that in that process that they're not vulnerable, they can be vulnerable and both be putting other children at risk. So it's really important we understand the complexity of exploitation, and it isn't so clear cut. There isn't one fence or another. It actually, when we're looking at exploitation of children, it can be both. And I think the more we recognise that within our language is really important when working with children, to give them that chance.
Thanks, Karen. It's just to say to everybody, this is really our last slide, and it will be this guide that we'll also be sending out today from the Children's Society. I think we all feel like there's lots of new language out there that young people are using online, and it's just really about perhaps helping guide us about some of the language that's more helpful, that avoids the victim blaming and sometimes adultification of our young people, and trying to make them responsible for decisions that they're not really able to make yet, although they may want to feel like they can make those decisions. So this is just a really easy tool to pick up, and we hope that some of the resources we've shared with you today will perhaps appear in some of your staff notice rooms, and perhaps be shared at wider safeguarding meetings within your educational settings. And what I'll do now is I'm going to stop the recording,